Hey everyone, Dr. Nick here. Welcome to another episode of Spark, Ignite Your Body's Ability or Your Body's Action Potential. So in this episode is our third out of 4 episodes on the topic of concussion, and it's titled What You Need to Know to Decrease Your Risk of Concussion. So that's what we're going to be talking about this whole time. This is what we're going to cover. What we currently know that increases your risk of concussions. So if we know what increases your risk, then if we can control some of those things, obviously will help us decrease the risk of getting concussions. Do helmets and mouth guards protect you from concussions? Which is a common question I get from people. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the role of your neck in concussion prevention. So those are the 4 main things we'll be covering. And last week, if you missed us, we talked about how to increase your speed of recovery from a concussion without compromising safety. So if that's of interest to you, go back. We filmed it last Thursday lunchtime, same time. Watch that episode, as well as lots of good stuff in there. So back to today's topic, how to decrease your risk of concussion. So what do we currently know that increases your risk? It's sort of categorized really under one big umbrella, which is anything that mentally makes you not being 100% all there when you go to play a game will increase your risk of concussion. So what I mean by mentally not being all there, it's hard to concentrate, that kind of stuff. Just not quite in the game. So what could some of those things be? The research shows inadequate sleep is well-known link to increased risk of concussion, which makes sense. If you're tired, exhausted, not enough sleep, your reaction time's not going to be as quick, you're mentally not going to be quite there on the footy field and therefore, or a soccer field or whatever sport you're playing. Increase your risk of getting knocked because you're not able to get out of the way quick enough. A previous concussion increases your risk of having another concussion. Psychological stress, so if it's been a crazy stressful day, again, your mind might not be completely focused on the game, you might be a little bit elsewhere, and as a result, that will increase your risk of concussion. This one is more relating to players who are new to a sport, so not being familiar with the flow of the game. So right now in particular, women's AFL footy is really coming up onto a rise, which is pretty exciting, I think is awesome. But a lot of these players have never played footy before, or not to this extent. And so being new at the sport, if you don't know the flow of the game, you don't know where other people are with regard to you, where you should be, when to be, all those types of things, your lack of awareness increases your risk of getting hit and injured and knocked on the head there as a result. Not even knocked on the head, like we've talked before, concussions aren't necessarily from just knocks on the head. They could also be even blows to the body that causes your brain to shake inside your head. So there's a variety of those different things more likely to occur in people who are newer to a sport or not as familiar with the flow of the game. Medications that affect your mental status and nervous system, they would increase your risk of concussion for the same reasons again. Now, this is another one actually. Possibly dehydration could increase your risk of concussion. Some research to show that might be a possibility. We don't know fully exactly why. Some thought is if you're quite dehydrated, you have decreased what's called CSF, which is this fluid that acts like a cushion. It has many purposes, but one of them can be acting like a cushion around the brain, between your brain and your skull. So if you got a bit less of that from significant dehydration, well, that would minimize a protective barrier inside your head, and could increase your risk of getting a concussion. So that's possibly part of it as well. Now, with regard to some other questions I often get from people is, does a helmet protect me from a concussion? And this is really interesting because With helmets, the research has shown they actually do not prevent concussions. It's a really interesting study about NFL players when they practice. A lot of teams these days practice without helmets because they get less concussions practicing without a helmet than they do with a helmet. And that is really interesting. Some of the thought behind that is when you've got a helmet, you feel, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Unbreakable. You're protected to the hilts, and as a result, you just go for it 150%. Whereas when you've got no helmet, a bit more vulnerable sensation, and so you're a bit more cautious about how you attack certain situations, how you receive hits, all those kinds of things. But the main reason why they believe helmets don't protect you from concussion, which makes sense to me, is even if you've got a helmet on and you get knocked, well, your brain can still shake inside your skull. And the shaking of your brain inside and banging against the edges of your skull will cause bruising of that brain and therefore a concussion, regardless of any helmet that you've got on. The big positive of helmets, and one of the biggest purposes behind them, is to minimize skull fractures. And it definitely does that, but it doesn't minimize concussions. What about mouth guards? So there's no research either to show that mouth guards prevent concussions. There's a couple of studies out there that show it might a little bit, but overall that's not thought to make a big difference. It definitely helps keep your teeth nice and clean, and not clean, but protected. But the idea behind how it might help prevent concussion is, with a mouth guard, what happens is you can't clench your teeth all the way together. So that means up here, what's called your TMJ, where your jaw joins the rest of your skull, there's a bit of a space there because your jaw's a little bit always open. So if you get whacked, the force, because there's a space here, isn't going to get conducted from your jaw straight to your skull. There's a bit of a barrier. But again, if you get whacked pretty hard, it's likely that your head's going to swing back like a whiplash type action, and your brain's going to shake inside your skull anyways, and that could lead to a concussion too. So, is mouthguard worthwhile for concussion risk? At this stage, research would say is unlikely to make a big difference. It might a little bit, but at least wear it, protect your teeth, makes your smile better. Now, last section, the role of your neck in concussion prevention. So with one thing that is known for sure with regard to preventing concussions is the stronger your neck muscles are, the wider the girth of your neck, the decreased risk of concussions. And you might be wondering why. A big part of it, I believe, has to do with absorption of shock. So if you get knocked in the head, or probably a better example would be this, because it's quite common, a head to surface. Let's say you are jumping up to mark a ball, and you land on the ground and your head just hits against the surface of the ground quite hard. That can lead to concussion, but the stronger those neck muscles are, it'll minimize that whipping action of your neck hitting the ground. Your neck strength will slow down the speed at which your head drops and hits the ground. So that makes perfect sense. The slower your head hits the ground, the less the force on your head, the less likely you've got a concussion. Same thing if you were to get hit, let's say a big hit onto your chest and whipping your head back. Well, again, the stronger your neck muscles are, the more it'll help absorb the force of that hit, and your neck and your head won't whip back quite as much. Brain won't shake as hard inside your skull, less likelier to get a concussion. So for that reason, we tend to see concussions are actually more prevalent in teenagers, especially younger teenagers, because their necks are weaker, and also in girls. So those girls who are playing in contact as well as collision sports technically at a higher risk of concussions than their male counterparts because of even just that strength perspective of the neck. Well, I shouldn't say that for everybody. Some girls out there are a lot stronger than guys, definitely. Now, the other thing that could play a part, and this one there isn't as much research to back this one up, but I'll walk you through it from a logical perspective because to me it makes sense as well, is the curve of your neck. So what we do know is normally your neck should have a nice sort of C-type curve to it. It's called a cervical lordosis. You develop that as an infant. Within the first few months of life, you're on your tummy, you lift up your head to look around, explore the world and crawl, and that's actually where you get that neck curve from. And that neck curve is critical because it helps provide strength to your neck as well as shock absorption, a nice sort of springy action. So your whole spine's got a little bit of an S bend to it from the side. From the front, nice and straight, but from the side, it has a little bit of a curve through it. So again, gives your spine some springiness. It's just this funny combination between flexibility, springiness, and strength. Now, let's think about it first from a strength perspective. It's just natural. We know, the walls of a dam have got a bit of an arc on them. Just arc structures as a whole are a stronger structure. So if you lose that curve, which these days, honestly, almost everybody loses that curve because we're looking down all the time, playing on our phones, laptops, desk work, all those kinds of things. We lose that curve, you lose some of the strength from the arc of your neck. And as a result, if you lose some of the strength of your neck, like we've mentioned before, you have a greater risk of getting that force being transferred through to your brain, and therefore increase your risk of concussion. Secondly, from the springiness that the curve provides for your neck, if you lose that springiness, it will obviously have a big impact as to how your neck can absorb the force going through your body and making your brain shake. I like this analogy to help explain how that could work. So let's say you get in a car accident and you've got a new car, the ones that when you get in a car crash crumple up like an accordion to just become pretty much next to nothing. Well, the occupant, the driver inside, is absorbing less of the force because the car has taken the large chunk of that force. What about, let's say you got in the same car accident, same speed with an old car that doesn't crumple up, the driver inside is going to absorb a lot more of that force of the crash. And I think of it the exact same way. Again, there's no research to back this statement up, but it just makes sense to me. If you've lost that curve of your neck and therefore lost some of the springiness of your neck, in my mind, it makes sense that your body, without a good curve of your neck, it's like it's driving your brain is like it's driving in an old car, which isn't going to crumple up. So that means your brain is going to get a lot more of the impact, increasing the risk of concussion more than likely, as compared to having your brain in a new car with a neck that's got a nice curve absorbing that force. So just some food for thought, and that's where obviously chiropractic could be quite beneficial from the perspective of restoring good flexibility in that neck. Chiropractic adjustments themselves won't restore the curve of your neck, but there's some different exercises that we can provide that can help improve that curve and improve that springiness and strength arc of your neck, which can help with decreasing concussion. In my mind, makes perfect sense. Now, I believe that is it. Those are the key things that you need to know to decrease your risk of concussion. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. If you think that's valuable, share it to some of your friends, especially those that are playing some collision and contact sports out there. Share it to your coaches or anyone that you think that would be of relevance to them. If you got questions or comments, type them in below and I'd be happy to spend some time later on. I'll answer them, or if it's a question that requires a lengthy answer, I might talk about it more in the next video next week. So next week, if you tune in, it'll probably be Thursday lunchtime again, we'll be talking about this breaking news of a 3.8 increased risk of ACL tear post-concussion. Almost 4 times increased risk of getting an ACL tear when you go back to play after you've suffered a concussion, or actually after you've healed up from your concussion and you go back and play. And that statistic is true for the next 90 days after your brain's healed up. So we're going to talk about that in our next chat on Thursday next week. Take care, guys.